You're safe now. Daddy.
Minneapolis in a whiteout. Nolan Hale, a brilliant tech CEO, steps into -30 winds and spots small boots buried by the Stone Arch Bridge. He digs, pulls a shivering boy free, and sees a half-snowflake pendant on a frayed cord. It matches the one in his wallet. A name from his past hits hard. Did he choose the cold over family? And is this brave kid his son? Minneapolis did not simply freeze. It roared. Wind scraped along the river like a metal file, driving sheets of snow into the Stone Arch Bridge and swallowing sirens whole. From the top floor of a North Star Intelligence, Nolan Hale watched the storm erase edges until the city was one gray breath. He slid on his high-end glasses, their lenses catching the shimmer of 1,000 tiny storm markers pulsing on the wall map. The -30 wind chill made even his windows creak. He stepped from the elevator into the private garage where heat lamps glowed like a winter sun. An armored SUV idled, exhaust rising in a white column. Nolan's dark hair was neat despite the static, his Italian suit hidden under a technical overcoat that sealed at the throat. A prestigious watch flashed at his cuff as he checked the time with the habit of a man who lives by timing. Out there, plows were late, batteries were dying, and one fallen branch could tip a substation from strain to failure. "Routes updated," said Priya, his head of ops, stepping from the shadows with a tablet. "We shifted the warming buses to the east side. Shelters are at 87%. We are close to capacity. Open a second gym at 9th, Nolan said, voice even, and take the south cruise off the parkway. The ice there is black glass tonight." Priya studied him. "You plan to go out?" He nodded once. "I want eyes on the river span. The bridge camera fogged at dusk. We need a new angle." She hesitated. "The board asked for your status. They are on standby for the 7 a.m. briefing." Nolan allowed a small smile. "Tell them I'm working my shift." Approachable in tone, decisive in content. That balance had built North Star, an AI platform that learned winter the way a medic learns a heartbeat. It routed plows, prioritized outages, predicted shelter surges. It was built to keep people moving when the world stalled. He tried not to think about what he had built it to keep out. Control, schedules, proof. He had engineered his life so precisely that even his grief had version numbers. Years ago, in a different storm, he had loved a data ethics researcher named Maya Bennett. They shared late coffees and cold walks, arguing about blind spots and responsibility. During a pre-IPO compliance surge, he rushed an algorithm into pilot. She said the model could miss the people it was supposed to help and asked him to slow down. He chose the launch. She chose the door. The breakup split his days into before and after. In his wallet, he kept a half of a 3D printed carbon snowflake gear, the edges soft from years of rubbing a thumb along its teeth. They had made it at a makerspace as a joke about distributed systems, then split it into two halves and etched the phrase, "Build brave," between them, a promise to each other to do the hard, right thing. He had not looked at it in months. Tonight, his finger found it without asking. The garage door rattled open. The wind reached in, hungry and loud. He paused at the threshold the way a diver pauses at the lip of a dark lake. The city down below was a mosaic of problems he could measure and a handful he could not. On the wall upstairs, North Star's storm model moved like a living thing, learning, recalculating, warning. "Do not forget the people under the pixels," Maya had said. He heard her voice clearly when the wind rose. "Boss," said Anders, his security driver lifting the hood of his parka. "Visibility's a nightmare. We can wait 10. "We cannot," Nolan said gently. "We partner with the city because we move when the city cannot. We will take the river road, slow and boring." Anders exhaled. Slow and boring it is. They rolled out, tires chewing into packed snow. Storefronts ghosted past. Dark, except for a handmade sign in a bakery window that read, "Closed for the storm. See you safe tomorrow." The SUV's cabin was warm, but not comforting. Nolan watched the map on his phone feed data to the dashboard, a river of numbers threaded through a living city. He had built North Star to make winter survivable. Yet, there were winters inside him the system could not thaw. He thought of the last email he never sent, the 6 words he owed to someone who no longer returned calls. "I was wrong. I am sorry." He wondered how a man like him, trained to optimize, learned to say them too late and mean them anyway. A vibration in his palm. He glanced down. An anomaly flag popped up from the river span. Not unusual on a night like this. Heat drifting from an engine. A plow at rest. A raccoon huddled under a beam. Still, the location prickled. Off the main path near the guardrail. The camera there had fogged. The map asked for a human to look. Nolan closed his wallet around the half-snowflake and slid it deep into his coat. "Adjust to the bridge," he said softly. "Let's put eyes on it." The stone arch bridge was half a mile of ice-slick steel and white noise. Wind funneled through the arches like a ghost's breath, howling against the frozen railings. The SUV's headlights carved short tunnels in the blizzard before the flakes swallowed them again. Anders slowed to a crawl. The wipers screeched, smearing frost across the windshield. "Visibility's near zero," Anders muttered. "You sure this is smart?" Nolan leaned forward, squinting through the swirl. "Slow and steady. Pull over at the midpoint." As the vehicle crept forward, the city disappeared behind a curtain of snow. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the faint crackle of frozen sleet against metal. Then, something flashed red on the dashboard monitor. Nolan's app pulsed again. One isolated human heat signature, right where the camera had gone offline. He opened the door before Anders could protest. The cold hit like a blow, air so sharp it sliced the inside of his nose. His breath turned to ice crystals almost instantly. "Stay put," he said, voice clipped, already crunching through the snow. The bridge lights blurred into halos. He moved slowly, boots sinking deep into drifts. Every few steps he paused to scan the white. The app's ping grew stronger. 5 meters ahead, near the guardrail. Then, out of the storm's scream, he heard it. A sound too soft to belong to the wind. A small, muffled cry. "Hello!" he called out, raising his voice above the storm. "Can you hear me?" No response. Only the whipping gale and another faint whimper, closer now. He pushed forward, kneeling by a drift that seemed oddly shaped. The snow there had collapsed inward, exposing the soles of 2 tiny boots. "God," he whispered, dropping to his knees. He started digging with his gloved hands, flinging snow aside in the frantic handfuls until his fingers struck cloth, then skin. A boy, upside down, tangled in what looked like torn guardrail netting and snow-soaked rope. The child's parka hood was half buried, his lashes crusted with ice, lips pale blue. "Hey, buddy," Nolan said, forcing calm into his tone. "You're going to be okay. I've got you." The boy's eyelids fluttered. A faint, broken whisper escaped him. "Cold. Help." Nolan yanked off his gloves and kept digging bare-handed. His skin burned instantly, but he ignored it. He pried the twisted rope loose, careful not to jolt the boy's legs. When the last knot gave way, the child sagged forward into his arms. Nolan pressed the boy's head against his chest, wrapping him in his stormliner. The child was light, too light, maybe 8 or 9. His parka was torn at the shoulder, the zipper jammed with ice. "Stay with me, kid," Nolan said, brushing snow from the boy's cheek. "You hear me? You're safe now." The boy's head lolled weakly against him. He blinked up, dazed. "Where's Aunt Liv?" Nolan froze. "We'll find her. But first, we need to get you warm." He stood, cradling the boy tightly, and trudged back toward the SUV. His overcoat snapped in the wind, the world reduced to white and breath. When he reached the vehicle, Anders threw the door open, eyes wide. "Good Lord, where'd he come from?" "Just drive," Nolan said, HQ, now. Inside, heat blasted from the vents, thawing frost on the boy's face. Nolan pressed his hand to the child's wrist. There was a pulse, weak but steady. He stripped off his own gloves and rubbed the boy's fingers to restore circulation. "Name?" Nolan asked softly. The boy's eyelids fluttered. "Leo." "Okay, Leo, I'm Nolan. You're safe, all right? You're going to be fine." Leo didn't answer. He was shaking violently now, breath short and shallow. Nolan wrapped him tighter and shouted to Anders, "Call HQ, tell them to prep the medical wing, and notify the storm refuge floor. We're 10 minutes out." As the SUV surged forward, Nolan noticed something glinting near the boy's collar. A pendant. Half of a small black snowflake made of carbon fiber hanging from a frayed cord. His heart stuttered. The teeth of the pendant looked exactly like the one he carried in his wallet. The same pattern, the same material, even the same fine etching along the edge. His throat tightened. He reached slowly, turning the pendant toward the dashlight. Etched along one arm of the snowflake were faint letters, barely visible under frost. "Build brave." The same engraving, the same phrase he and Maya had created together years ago. For a moment, the blizzard outside ceased to exist. All he could hear was the rush of his own pulse and the faint rattle of the heater. The boy in his arms stirred, whispering something too quiet to catch. Nolan's voice broke the silence. Softer this time. "Where did you get this, Leo?" the boy murmured, eyes half closed. "Mom." "Made it." Nolan's chest tightened. He gripped the pendant like proof of a miracle and a mistake colliding in one breath. His reflection stared back from the window, piercing blue eyes, white flakes in his dark hair, and a boy pressed against his heart who might just be the answer to every question he'd buried in data and distance. The lobby of North Star Intelligence had become a storm refuge that night. Cots lined the glass atrium, filled with stranded travelers, city workers, and families who'd lost power. Emergency lights cast a golden haze over the polished floors, blurring the line between corporate hub and humanitarian shelter. The air smelled of instant cocoa and ozone from overworked generators. Nolan pushed through the rotating doors, cradling Leo in his arms. The boy's small body trembled against him, his lips pale, lashes heavy with frost. A paramedic jogged forward from the triage station. "Male child, approximately 9, Nolan said quickly. "Hypothermic exposure, minor bruising, possible frostbite on fingers." The paramedic nodded, guiding them toward the elevator vestibule where a temporary clinic had been set up. As Nolan laid the boy on a cot, his coat still wrapped around him, the paramedic snapped into motion, checking vitals, attaching a small heater tube under the blanket, wrapping warming packs along the child's sides. "Core temp's low," the medic murmured, "but he's responsive. We'll stabilize him." Leo stirred. "Where's Aunt Liv?" "She's safe somewhere," Nolan said softly, kneeling beside the cot. "We'll find her soon, all right? Just rest." The boy blinked up at him, eyes bright hazel, flecked with green. For a fleeting instant, Nolan saw another pair of eyes layered over them, Maya's reflecting the glow of code strings on a screen, laughing as she teased him about his over-optimization. "You treat feelings like data," she'd said once, "and not everything worth loving fits a model." He blinked hard. "Keep him warm," he said to the medic, voice steady again. When he stood, his fingers brushed against Leo's chest, catching on something firm beneath the blanket. The boy clutched it instinctively, a pendant. Nolan hesitated, then gently pulled the cord free of the blanket. Half of a carbon fiber snowflake gear dangled in the glow of the portable heater. Same material, same design, same fine texture. The split edges were jagged, like puzzle teeth that had once locked perfectly with another half. Nolan felt a tremor in his chest. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his own half. The pieces mirrored each other, identical down to the smallest notch. The engraving on Leo's, "Ability brave." His own carried the same words, His pulse stumbled. He remembered the night he and Maya had printed them at a local makerspace. She'd laughed when the machine jammed halfway through. Distributed systems, she'd joked. Two halves of one design, neither works alone. The boy's hand shot out suddenly, gripping Nolan's wrist. His fingers were small but strong. "Don't take it." Nolan crouched. "I won't. I promise. It's yours." Leo studied him through heavy eyes. "Mom said, if I ever got lost, the snowflake would help me find my way back." Something cracked inside Nolan that had nothing to do with ice. He swallowed hard and nodded. "It will, Leo. It will." He sat there long after the medic moved on, watching the boy's chest rise and fall. Each breath steadied something in him and unraveled something else. When Leo finally drifted into sleep, Nolan stood, his joints stiff from cold and tension. He turned to his head of operations, Priya, who'd arrived breathless with a thermos of coffee. "Get our data team to reroute the storm shelter feeds," he said quietly. "But first, pull every log tied to that bridge anomaly. I want timestamps, crosswind speeds, everything." Priya frowned. "That's already in the archive. You think this was planned?" He shook his head. "No, I think it was fate." She glanced toward the boy on the cot. "Who is he?" Nolan's gaze lingered on the small pendant resting against the blanket. "I don't know," he said softly, "but I intend to." When she left, Nolan found himself pacing the far side of the lobby, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the storm like a restless ocean. Outside, snow swirled in hypnotic spirals, wind-bending lampposts until their light seemed to kneel. He took out his wallet again and held both halves of the snowflake up to the glass. They aligned perfectly, completing each other through the reflection. He could almost hear Maya's voice again. Warm, certain, insistent. "Don't forget what we build for." His throat tightened. He had built for efficiency, for precision, for the clean elegance of control. Yet somewhere along that path, he'd lost the one person who saw him beyond the equations. Behind him, the medic's voice broke through the hum. "He's stabilizing. Color's returning." Relief washed over him in a quiet wave. He turned back to see Leo's fingers curl around the pendant, a faint smile ghosting his lips even in sleep. Nolan slipped both halves of the snowflake into his pocket and whispered under his breath, "We'll find your way back, kid. I promise." Outside, the storm raged on. Unaware that inside this glass fortress something long frozen had begun to thaw. The hum of heaters filled the night. A cluster of stranded workers murmured near the coffee station, wrapped in North Star emergency blankets. Nolan stood a few paces away, watching the boy, Leo, sleep under layers of fleece. The monitors above his cot pulsed soft green. A nurse handed him a steaming mug. "He's lucky you found him," she said quietly. "Another 30 minutes out there and—" She trailed off, eyes flicking toward the window where the storm still screamed against the glass. Nolan nodded, but said nothing. The warmth of the cup seeped into his hands without reaching his chest. When Leo stirred again, his lashes trembled before his eyes opened. Slow, wary, intelligent. "This isn't a hospital," he whispered. "No," Nolan said, setting down the mug. "It's my company. We open our doors when the city shelters fill up." Leo glanced around the spacious lobby, half-lit and lined with makeshift cots. "Big place, for people with no homes." "It's meant for everyone," Nolan said. "Storm doesn't care what's on your paycheck." Leo's brow furrowed. "That's what my mom says." Nolan's pulse stuttered. "What's your mom's name?" The boy hesitated as though measuring trust. "Maya." It hit like a punch. His breath caught, sharp, shallow. "Maya," Leo nodded slowly. "She draws maps, numbers and arrows and stuff. She used to say my dad worked with weather, but he chose the cold instead." Nolan's throat went dry. He forced his voice steady. "She said that?" "Uh-huh. But Aunt Liv says she didn't mean it mean." Leo's voice softened, fragile as the flakes still clinging to his hair. "She said sometimes grown-ups just get lost in their own storms. Nolan swallowed hard. And Aunt Liv, where is she now? The boy looked away. We move a lot. She says we don't stay in one place long, especially when the big storms come. We got a rule, keep moving till the sky stops yelling. He tried to smile, but it faltered. Last night we were in a storage place. The roof started leaking, and Aunt Liv said she'd find food, but she didn't come back before it got bad, so I went outside. His voice trembled. I was gonna walk to the lights. Then everything went white. Nolan felt a tightness in his chest that no logic could unpick. He knelt beside the cot. You were brave, Leo. You did everything right. Leo blinked at him, curiosity cutting through his fear. You talk like Aunt Liv. She says brave doesn't mean not scared. It means moving anyway. A small laugh escaped Nolan's throat, unplanned. She's right. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket, drawing out the other half of the snowflake pendant. The carbon fiber gleamed under the lamp. He placed it gently on the edge of the cot. Leo stared. You have one too? I used to, Nolan said softly. Long ago, before the world got busy. The boy reached out, fingertips brushing the pendant's teeth. They fit. Yes, Nolan whispered. They do. He turned the piece so Leo could see the engraving, those same faint words etched in fine grooves. Build brave. Leo's eyes widened. Mom said those words too. It's our code. When I get scared, I say it in my head. Nolan couldn't speak for a moment. He stared at the identical halves, the quiet proof that the past hadn't vanished. It had been walking out there, in the storm, wearing a frayed cord and his old love's courage. He rose abruptly, the heat of realization pushing through the cold. I need to make a call. Outside the triage area, he slipped into a quiet corridor and pulled out his phone. His fingers shook as he typed. Priya, he said when she answered, voice rougher than usual. I need a background run on Amaya Bennett. She used to work at North Star, Data Ethics Division. And check any connections to an Olivia Bennett. Fast, but discreet. Priya's tone sharpened. Understood. Are we looking for next of kin? Just context. His eyes drifted toward the boy in the next room. She might have been more than that. When he hung up, he pressed his palm to his chest where his half of the pendant still rested. The phrase echoed like breath against frost. Build brave. He'd said those words years ago as a vow, to never let fear decide what mattered. Somewhere between the IPOs and the boardrooms, he'd forgotten. Now, staring at that boy asleep under his roof, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a decade, a second chance. He returned to the triage room quietly. Leo was still half awake, eyes following the shadows. Nolan adjusted the blanket and said softly, You should rest. The storm's got a long night ahead. Leo's voice was faint but clear. You sound like my mom used to, before she got sick. Nolan froze. Sick? She got real tired all the time. Said her chest hurt. Aunt Liv took her to a hospital once. After that, we moved again. The air in the room felt thinner. Nolan's hand trembled slightly as he tucked the blanket around the boy's shoulders. I'll find her, he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he meant Maya, Olivia, or himself. Outside, the wind howled against the glass. Inside, two halves of a snowflake pendant lay side by side under the same roof for the first time in years. By dawn, the storm had buried Minneapolis in a white silence so deep it seemed the city itself had forgotten how to move. Plows crawled down empty streets. The Mississippi below the Stone Arch Bridge was frozen over, a ribbon of dull glass reflecting the pale blue morning. From the upper floors of North Star's tower, the world looked peaceful. But Nolan knew that peace was always the storm's illusion. He hadn't slept. The overnight emergency team buzzed quietly around the shelter floor while Leo dozed, his hand still clutching the half-snowflake like a talisman. Nolan stood by the window, tie loosened, phone in hand. When Priya's message came through, he opened it immediately. Subject: Discreet background. Maya and Olivia Bennett. Maya Bennett, former North Star data ethics researcher. Filed resignation 7 years ago during the compliance audit phase. No legal record since. Last known address. Rented unit in Whittier, terminated 5 years prior. Emergency contact listed Olivia Bennett, younger sister. Profession, freelance nurse, unlicensed caregiver. Temporary forwarding address, South Warehouse District, Unit 14B. There it was, a line of text that pulled the years apart like a seam. He dialed a secure number. A man answered after 2 rings. "Detective Harrow here." "It's Hale," Nolan said. His voice was low, deliberate. "I need a discreet trace. Olivia Bennett, South Warehouse District. She's not in trouble. I just need to know she's safe." The detective grunted. "You looking for someone's kid again?" Nolan glanced back at Leo, still asleep under the emergency lights. "Something like that." "Got it. Give me a few hours." He ended the call and slipped the phone into his coat pocket. He felt the familiar pull between 2 worlds. The man who managed systems and the man who'd just realized some things weren't meant to be managed. When he turned, Leo was awake, sitting up with a blanket wrapped like a cape. The boy's cheeks were flushed now, a faint smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Morning," Nolan said softly. "How are you feeling?" "Warm," Leo murmured. "Hungry." Nolan smiled for the first time that day. "That I can fix." He fetched a tray from the staff canteen. Oatmeal, banana slices, hot cocoa in a paper cup. Leo eyed it like it was treasure. "You must really like storms," the boy said between spoonfuls. "You work for the people who chase them, right?" Nolan sat across from him. "Sort of. I build things to help the city move when the weather turns bad. Algorithms that learn where the danger is before it finds people." Leo tilted his head, curious. "So, you make maps too, just different ones?" Nolan nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe your mom and I aren't so different after all." The boy smiled faintly, cocoa mustache dotting his lip. "Mom said numbers can tell stories if you listen close." Nolan swallowed hard. She was right about that too. Just then, Priya approached with a tablet. "Nolan," she said quietly, "we ran your request through public data sets, food pantries, bus logs, shelter registries. There's a repeating name, Olivia Bennett. She signed in at the 9th Street Clinic 3 days ago, address field blank." He took the tablet, scanning. A note at the bottom read, "Patient accompanying, M. Bennett, chest infection follow-up." His chest tightened. "She was alive then," he murmured. 3 days ago." Priya hesitated. "You think this boy is—" Nolan met her eyes. "I don't think. I know." When she left, he turned back to Leo. The boy was fiddling with the pendant again, turning it over and over between his fingers. "Leo," Nolan said gently, "can I ask you something important?" The boy looked up. "When your mom got sick, did she ever talk about doctors? Hospitals?" Leo frowned, trying to remember. "She didn't like doctors. Said bills got bigger every time she went. Aunt Liv said it wasn't safe for her to work anymore, so we started moving around. Sometimes she'd fall asleep while talking. One day she just didn't wake up. Aunt Liv said we had to go." The words landed like ice water. Nolan leaned forward, steadying his breath. "I'm so sorry." Leo's voice wavered. "Aunt Liv said Mom didn't want anyone to find us because people might take me away. She said Dad chose his company, not her." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Nolan rubbed his temple, jaw clenched against the ache. "Maybe your mom was just scared. People say things when they're hurt." Leo nodded faintly. "Aunt Liv said that too." For a long moment, the only sound was the storm outside easing into quiet flurries. Then the detective's call buzzed through Nolan's phone. He stepped aside, answering quickly. "Hale," Harrow said. "Got a lead. Olivia Bennett's been renting a unit at the old distribution complex off 18th Street. Records show she's been in and out, using a prepaid generator. Neighbors report she sometimes watches a kid matching your boy's description." Nolan exhaled. "Thank you. You want me to bring her in?" "No," Nolan said sharply. "Just make contact. Tell her the boy's safe and she can come on her own terms. No police lights, no reporters, just tell her I'm here." "Copy that." When the line went dead, Nolan looked through the glass wall at the frozen city below. The sun was struggling through clouds, turning the snow into a blinding sea of light. He'd spent years mastering algorithms that could forecast the next 5 hours of a storm, but no code could have predicted this moment. A lost boy, a pendant split in two, and a second chance blowing in with the thaw. He slid his hand into his coat, feeling the familiar edges of his half-snowflake. Its twin now glinted against Leo's chest across the room, two halves of one promise, waiting to be made whole. By late afternoon, the storm had thinned to soft, drifting flakes. The city looked almost gentle under its white blanket, though beneath that calm lay power outages, stranded buses, and silent streets. Inside North Star's glass tower, generators hummed steadily. Nolan stood in the in-house clinic, watching a nurse finish the final step of a rapid kinship test. The nurse labeled 2 swabs, one from Leo, one from him, and slipped them into the analyzer. 10 minutes, she said quietly. Nolan nodded, but his hands were restless. He rubbed his thumb against his watch strap, then caught himself and forced it still. 10 minutes felt like an eternity for a man used to predicting storms down to the second. He turned to the window. Beyond the frost-streaked glass, downtown Minneapolis glimmered faintly, subdued, fragile. The kind of beauty that could break if you breathed too hard. Behind him, Leo sat on the clinic bed, swinging his feet. He'd insisted he wasn't sick, but had agreed to let the nurse check his frostbite, just in case. He watched everything with that same sharp, analytical curiosity Nolan remembered from Maya. The way she used to study data, not for its answers, but for its humanity. Leo looked up. "You don't like waiting, do you?" Nolan smiled faintly. "Not much. My mom said good things take time." "She was right," he murmured. The analyzer beeped. The nurse glanced at the screen, her brows lifting. She looked at Nolan, then hesitated, unsure whether to speak. "It's okay," Nolan said softly. "Just tell me." She exhaled. "Kinship, positive. 99.8% match." The words hit him like thunder, muffled by snow. He blinked once, twice. The room seemed smaller suddenly, warmer, almost too bright. He approached the machine slowly, staring at the lines of data. It was one thing to suspect, another to see. The numbers were absolute. Leo watched him, head tilted. "Is that good?" Nolan's throat tightened. He forced himself to kneel so their eyes were level. "It means—" His voice wavered, so he stopped, took a breath, and tried again. "It means we're family, Leo." The boy blinked, processing. "Like cousins?" Nolan shook his head gently. "Closer than that." Leo's brow furrowed. "You mean, you're my—" "Yes," Nolan said quietly. "I'm your dad." For a long second, the only sound was the steady hum of the heater. Then Leo's eyes filled with confusion, surprise, and something deeper, recognition maybe, drawn from some hidden memory that words couldn't reach. "My mom." His voice trembled. "She said my dad was good at fixing things but bad at people." A sad smile ghosted over Nolan's face. "She wasn't wrong." Leo frowned. "Why didn't you come find us?" The question sliced clean through him. He had rehearsed apologies for years, for shareholders, for press, for product delays, but nothing prepared him for this. "Because I didn't know," he said softly, "and because when I finally looked back, it was already too late to fix what I broke." Leo's small hands gripped the edge of the cot. "You could fix stuff now, though, right?" The simplicity of it nearly undid him. He nodded slowly. "I can try." The boy stared at him for another moment, then looked down at the pendant resting against his chest. His fingers traced the grooves of "Build Brave." Mom said bravery wasn't loud, just steady. Nolan's voice was barely a whisper. She always had the right words. The nurse quietly stepped out, leaving them alone in the room. Nolan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the other half of the snowflake. He placed it gently beside Leo's. "These were made together," he said. "Two halves. They only fit when they're side by side." Leo smiled faintly. "Like us?" "Exactly like us." For a few heartbeats, silence hung between them. Soft, alive, fragile. Then Leo yawned, exhaustion catching up. "Can I stay here tonight?" "Of course." Nolan tucked the blanket around him, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. Watching him sleep now, his small chest rising and falling, the snowflake glinting faintly, Nolan felt the weight of years settle and lift all at once. He moved to the window, staring at his reflection in the glass. He saw not the confident CEO from investor interviews, but a man stripped bare, haunted, humbled, quietly grateful. He thought of headlines, of boardroom optics, of the storm of public perception that always followed any personal revelation. He imagined his father's cold voice, long gone but still echoing in memory. Emotion clouds precision. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the world needed a little less precision and a little more heart. He turned off the overhead light, letting the soft blue of the monitors fill the room. Behind him, Leo murmured in his sleep, something about snowflakes and home. Nolan whispered into the quiet, "You've always been home, kid." "I just forgot how to find it." The wind pressed faintly against the windows, no longer screaming, just breathing. And for the first time in years, Nolan Hale felt something stronger than control. He felt belonging. Morning brought a gray stillness. The storm had weakened, but the cold clung stubbornly to the air, sharp as broken glass. Sunlight filtered through the tall lobby windows, revealing streets buried in drifts, cars frozen mid-motion, a city paused between chaos and calm. Nolan sat in the corner of his office, coffee cooling beside untouched emails. The kinship report glowed faintly on his tablet, its verdict absolute. His reflection in the glass was pale and tired, yet something in his expression had softened. An ache he'd carried for years now replaced by quiet awe. He'd found his son. But what did it mean to be a father now? To walk back into a life he'd once left behind, unintentionally, but still gone too long? He glanced toward the shelter floor through the security feed. Leo was awake, sitting cross-legged on his cot, sipping cocoa, chatting with a volunteer. He looked lighter somehow, like warmth itself was relearning his face. Nolan turned back to the skyline. He'd built an empire out of logic, yet he'd lost everything that made life human. If Maya were here, she'd tell him that progress meant nothing without compassion. She had always warned him that data without heart was just numbers pretending to care. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "How did you know all this before I did?" he whispered to the empty room. The door opened softly behind him. Priya stepped in with a folder. "You asked for Olivia Bennett's records. Detective Harrow found her." Nolan straightened. "Where?" "She's in the 18th Street warehouse district. Old storage unit converted into a living space. She's been paying cash for heat and generator fuel. No sign of her since last night." His pulse quickened. "Is she safe?" Harrow's voice came through the open line on the folder's speaker. "Saw signs she left in a hurry before the blizzard hit. There's food, a bed, medical supplies. Looks like she's caring for someone who's been sick, probably your Maya. But the unit's empty now." Nolan's fingers tightened on the desk edge. "Any trace she's alive?" "Neighbors said they saw her last 2 days ago, heading north, probably to look for help. She's resourceful, boss. She's not the type to leave that kid unless she had to." Nolan exhaled, steadying himself. "All right. Keep looking, but stay discreet. No press, no police." When the call ended, he leaned back, gaze fixed on the pendant around his neck. The two halves of the snowflake now hung together, perfectly joined. For years, he'd convinced himself control was love, that providing, protecting, predicting were enough. But this fear, this tenderness, this hope, felt different. It wasn't control. It was surrender. He stood, crossed the room, and walked down to the shelter floor. Leo saw him immediately. "Hey, you're back." "Didn't go far." Nolan smiled gently. "You holding up?" The boy nodded. "They said the power's coming back soon. Then we can go find Aunt Liv." Nolan crouched beside him. "We're already working on it. Some friends of mine are looking." Leo tilted his head. "You have people for that?" "Yeah," Nolan said quietly. "But I'd still rather find her myself." The boy's gaze dropped to the pendant. "Did my mom give you that one?" "She did," Nolan said. "We made them together a long time ago, before you were born." Leo traced the matching halves, eyes bright. "So, you loved her?" The question landed softly, but it carried weight. "Yes," Nolan said after a pause. "Very much. I just didn't know how to show it the way she needed." "She used to draw hearts in the corner of her notebooks," Leo murmured. "Said love's like code. You have to keep debugging it till it runs right." Nolan smiled through a tightening throat. "She always had the better metaphors." The boy looked up. "You could try again." "With her?" Leo shook his head. "With me." The simplicity of it undid him. He reached out and rested a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "I'd like that more than anything." Leo leaned into the touch, hesitant at first, then fully, the way kids do when they've learned trust isn't permanent but still choose to believe in it. Later, when Leo drifted off again, Nolan stepped away and stared across the vast shelter floor. Each cot held a person the storm had stranded. Each face reminded him of what Maya had tried to protect. He imagined the headlines that would come once the truth leaked. CEO manufactures air. PR snow job. North Star's hidden child. The optics would burn. Investors would question his judgment, accuse him of manipulation. And yet, as he watched his son sleep, Nolan realized none of it mattered. He whispered to himself, "You can't optimize fatherhood. You can only live it." He walked toward the glass doors, where snow still clung to the edges like frostbitten lace. Outside, the world was rebuilding itself, slowly, quietly. He'd spent his life perfecting systems that adapted to chaos. Now it was his turn to learn how to feel through it. He took out his phone and texted the detective. "If you find Olivia, tell her she's safe to come here. No cameras, no reporters, only family." Then he put the phone face down, the way he'd always promised himself he would when something truly mattered. Somewhere beyond the storm's fading roar, a second chance was waiting to be built, one not written in code or policy, but in warmth, forgiveness, and the steady rhythm of two hearts learning to sink again. The day passed in cautious quiet. The storm had loosened its grip, but Minneapolis still looked bruised. Snowbanks piled high along shuttered streets, ice weighing down power lines like ghosts of the night before. Inside North Star's tower, the generators hummed and the warmth held steady. Nolan moved through the shelter floor like a man walking between two lives. Employees nodded respectfully as he passed, but this time there was no CEO swagger, just the tired steadiness of someone who'd learned what control couldn't fix. He stopped by the family suite he'd ordered prepared that morning, a quiet corner on the 12th floor, far from cameras, stocked with blankets, toys, and simple food. It was meant to be temporary housing for any displaced families during the storm. Now it had another purpose. Leo stood in the doorway, taking it all in. "This is ours?" "For now," Nolan said, kneeling beside him. "It's a safe place until we find Aunt Liv." The boy's eyes darted to the shelf stacked with puzzles and an unopened chess set. "It's nice," he said softly, almost wary, as though niceness might come with conditions. "I had them bring things you might like," Nolan said. "If there's anything missing, we'll fix it." Leo shrugged, tugging at the hem of his sweater. You don't have to buy stuff for me. Nolan's chest tightened. I know, but I want you to feel at home here. The boy looked up at him for a moment, his face unreadable. Home isn't about stuff, he said finally. It's about who's there when it's cold. The words struck harder than any shareholder critique. Nolan swallowed, voice low. You sound just like your mom. Leo gave a small smile. She said that too. Nolan tried to smile back, but the weight of guilt lingered. He busied himself unpacking the small duffel they'd borrowed from the supply office. Fresh clothes, a spare toothbrush, a fleece-lined jacket. Simple things, but they felt like a promise. When the intercom buzzed softly, he rose. It was Priya. Detective Harrow's at the north entrance. He found Olivia Bennett. Nolan's heart stuttered. Bring them up. No press, no staff in the corridor. Minutes later, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The woman who stepped out looked like she'd walked through fire and frost both. Mid-30s, hair damp with melted snow, eyes sharp and guarded. She carried herself with defiance, but her hands trembled faintly. Ms. Bennett, Nolan said carefully. Olivia's gaze cut through him. You have no right to that name in your mouth. I just want to talk. You want to talk? She snapped. After all these years? After you built your empire on her work? On our research and left her with nothing? Her words hit like sleet. Maya left by choice, he said quietly, though even as he said it he felt how hollow it sounded. She left because you didn't listen. Olivia's voice cracked with something deeper than anger, grief. Because you cared more about proving a model than protecting people. Nolan took a breath. You're right. She blinked. What? He met her eyes steadily. You're right. I was arrogant. I thought fixing systems meant fixing lives. I was wrong. For the first time, her expression faltered. I didn't know about Leo, Nolan continued. Not until last night. He saved my life out there on the bridge without even realizing it. If I had known, if Maya had told me, Olivia's voice dropped to a whisper. She was going to, but then she got sick. I begged her to reach out, but she wouldn't risk it. She said you'd try to take Leo. She didn't trust that you'd choose the boy over your boardroom. I wouldn't have taken him from her, Nolan said, pain thick in his voice. But I would have come home. I would have stayed. She didn't believe that anymore. Olivia's tone softened just slightly. You broke her heart, Nolan. Not by leaving, but by proving she was right about you. He exhaled, shoulders sagging. Then maybe this is my chance to prove her wrong. Olivia studied him for a long moment. Why should I trust you now? Because you don't have to, he said. All I'm asking is that you see him. He's upstairs, safe, fed, warm. He's been asking about you since he woke up. Her composure cracked. The edge in her voice dissolved into something tremulous. He's here? Nolan nodded. Would you like to see him? She hesitated only a heartbeat before whispering, yes. He led her down the hall to the family suite. Leo sat on the bed sorting puzzle pieces. When he looked up, his face lit with instant recognition. Aunt Liv! Leo! She rushed forward, kneeling as he threw his arms around her neck. Oh, thank God! I thought I'd lost you. Nolan turned away, giving them space, his throat tight. The reunion was raw and real. Tears, laughter, words tumbling over each other. When Olivia finally stood, she wiped her eyes, turning to him. Her voice was hoarse. He says you helped him, that you kept him warm. I didn't do anything he wouldn't have done for me, Nolan said quietly. He's brave. Like his mother. Olivia's expression softened, though her tone stayed guarded. What now? I don't know, he admitted, but I'd like to find out. Together. No lawyers, no cameras, just family. She looked at him for a long time, the storm still in her eyes. Then she nodded once. 90 days. Trial run. He stays with me, but you can visit. No corporate circus. Nolan exhaled, relief threading through his chest. Agreed. From the bed, Leo beamed between them. Does that mean I get 2 grown-ups now? Nolan smiled. Something like that. Olivia laughed quietly, brushing his hair back. "You always wanted to fix things, huh, kid?" "Guess I learned from Mom." Her eyes glistened. Nolan turned away again, pretending to adjust the heater so she wouldn't see his own tears. Outside, the wind shifted. Less bitter now, almost gentle. So for the first time since the storm began, Nolan let himself believe that maybe the cold had finally broken. By nightfall, the snow had turned soft and silent, drifting like feathers past the glass walls of North Star's 12th floor. Inside the family suite, the lamps glowed warm. A faint hum from the heaters mixed with the sound of Leo's laughter, the light kind that came only after fear had loosened its grip. Nolan stood near the window, watching the city reclaim its breath. The ice on the power lines cracked and fell in ribbons. Plows carved slow paths through streets that had seemed lost just a day before. His reflection merged with the skyline, a man no longer hiding behind precision. Behind him, Olivia and Leo sat at the small dining table, building towers out of puzzle boxes. Their voices carried a rhythm of normalcy he hadn't realized he missed. "You can't make it that tall, Aunt Liv," Leo said with mock seriousness. "Oh, really?" she teased. "Watch me." The stack leaned, then collapsed, scattering pieces across the floor. Leo laughed until he hiccuped. Nolan turned, smiling. "Looks like an engineering failure." Olivia smirked faintly. "Then maybe the engineer should help next time." He lifted a brow. "Depends on your design specs." She gave a quiet chuckle, the first since she'd arrived. The sound did something small but seismic inside him. When Leo wandered off to fetch another puzzle, Olivia's expression shifted. "He likes you," she said softly. Nolan hesitated. "That feels undeserved." "It's not about deserving, it's about showing up." He nodded, staring at the pendant resting against his chest. "I'm trying to now." "I can see that," she admitted. Her eyes softened, then darkened again. "But I need you to understand something, Nolan. Maya's last months weren't easy. She was sick, scared, and stubborn. She didn't want your money, but she did want you to care. She just stopped believing that was possible." "I know," he said quietly, "and I can't rewrite that. But maybe I can start writing what comes next." Olivia studied him. "So, what are you going to do? With the company, the board, all of it? Once people find out?" "I'm not sure yet," he admitted, "but I'm done hiding behind headlines." She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "That's not an easy promise for a man like you." He met her gaze. "Maybe not. But it's the only one worth keeping." The elevator chimed in the hall, breaking the moment. Priya's voice echoed faintly through the intercom. "Nolan, you might want to see this." He stepped into the corridor and met her halfway. She handed him a tablet with a grim expression. "Someone leaked footage from last night. Security cam near the bridge," she said. "It's grainy, but you're visible, carrying Leo. It's already trending." On screen, the video looped silently. Nolan pushing through a whiteout, a boy limp in his arms, headlights cutting through snow. The caption on social media read, "Who's the child the CEO saved?" He felt the air leave his lungs. How bad? Every outlet's picked it up. The city's mayor retweeted it with thanks. But the speculation's brutal. Some think it's a PR stunt. Others think it's your son. Olivia appeared in the doorway, arms folded tight. "Of course they do." "I didn't leak this," Nolan said firmly. "I believe you," she said, "but it doesn't matter. You know how fast these things spiral." Priya hesitated. "The board's calling for a statement. They want to get ahead of the story before it controls the narrative." Nolan shook his head. "No spin. No narrative. Not this time." "So what? Silence?" He looked back toward the room where Leo sat cross-legged on the floor, humming to himself, lost in concentration. "No," Nolan said. "The truth." Olivia's eyes widened. "You're seriously going public?" "Yes. I owe him that, and I owe Maya that." She stepped closer. "Do you understand what that means? The media will pick apart every choice you've ever made. Your investors will panic. He met her stare, steady and calm. Then let them. She exhaled sharply, somewhere between disbelief and admiration. You really are your stubborn old self. Maybe, he said, smiling faintly. But this time, I'm stubborn for something that matters. Later, in the quiet after Priya left, Olivia sat beside him near the window. The city lights reflected off the snow, casting faint gold across their faces. I don't know what Maya would say if she saw this, Olivia murmured. Part of her would yell at you. The other part, maybe she'd finally rest. Nolan's voice was low. Then maybe this is for both of them, for her and for him. Leo patted over, clutching the two halves of the snowflake pendant. They fit together better when they're warm, he said, holding them out. Nolan smiled gently. That's true. Olivia watched as he clipped the halves together, the carbon edges locking perfectly. Leo looked between them. Can we all stay here tonight? Just till the snow stops? Nolan met Olivia's eyes. She hesitated, then nodded. One night, she said softly. After that, we'll see. Fair enough, he said. Leo climbed into the bed under the fleece blanket, clutching the pendant. Within minutes, he was asleep. Silence filled the room, comfortable, human, fragile. Outside, the city lights shimmered like constellations reflected on snow. Nolan spoke quietly, almost to himself. Maybe the world doesn't need bigger systems. Maybe it just needs smaller promises kept. Olivia didn't answer. She just watched him with something close to forgiveness. The night was long, but this time the storm outside didn't feel so cold. The next morning, light crept over the city like a cautious truce. Snowmelt dripped in slow rhythm from the North Star Tower awnings, the sound soft as breath. Inside the family suite, warmth had found its rhythm again, the quiet clink of a spoon in cocoa, the faint hum of heaters, the boyish laughter of Leo as he watched his robot sled spark to life. Careful, Nolan warned, crouching beside him. That scooter motor has a kick. Leo grinned. That's the point. They were in the indoor parking ramp, the air smelling faintly of metal and ozone. With a little help from North Star's maintenance staff, father and son had repurposed scraps into a sled that looked part engineering marvel, part cardboard miracle, duct tape, aluminum, and childlike imagination bound into one improbable machine. Ready? Leo asked, eyes gleaming. Nolan smiled. Born ready. They released it down the ramp. The little contraption glided a few feet, veered left, then spun in a slow, proud circle before bumping to a stop. Leo whooped in triumph, his laughter echoing off the concrete. It worked! It did, Nolan said, kneeling beside the sled. But if we upgrade the weight balance here... Leo interrupted, grinning. Dad, you can't fix everything. The word Dad hung in the air, fragile and startling. Nolan froze. His throat tightened before he managed a quiet reply. No, he said softly. I guess I can't. Upstairs, Olivia watched through the glass railing, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. She'd spent most of the night pacing, the storm of her distrust only beginning to thaw. Yet, as she watched the two of them together, the cautious man learning to laugh again, the boy discovering safety and warmth, she felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. When Nolan and Leo returned, snow still dusting their boots, Olivia was waiting at the kitchen counter with mugs of cocoa. Fun? She asked. Leo nodded eagerly. We made a robot sled. I saw. She smiled faintly. Not bad for your first engineering project, kid. Leo's eyes brightened. Dad says we can test it outside when the snow softens. The word, Dad, again. Olivia's breath hitched, but she didn't correct him. Instead, she turned to Nolan. He's happy. That's new. He deserves to be, Nolan said quietly. He's been running from storms too long. Olivia's voice softened. And you? He hesitated. I used to think storms were something to outsmart. Now I know they're something you endure, together. She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. The media's still spinning. You're trending as the CEO with the mystery child. Reporters are outside your gate. How long before someone finds his name? I don't care what they print, Nolan said, but I do care how he sees me. I don't want him thinking I'm just another man who hides behind PR statements. Olivia nodded slowly. Then what's your plan? Transparency, he said simply, but not the corporate kind, the human kind. She folded her arms. You mean an apology? Yes, Nolan said. Publicly. I'll take responsibility for what happened, every mistake I made with Maya, every blind spot that led to her struggle. North Star's going to open its storm data model to the public. No NDAs, no filters. Olivia blinked, caught off guard. That could cost you millions. He smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time I spent something worth more. Just then, Leo returned from the bedroom, holding the rejoined snowflake pendant. Hey, he said, you know what Mom used to say about snowflakes? Olivia smiled through a shimmer of tears. What, honey? That no two are ever the same, Leo said. But if you look close enough, they all melt into the same water. Nolan's voice was soft. That's beautiful. She said people are like that too, Leo added. Different shapes, same heart. For a long moment, no one spoke. The heater hummed. Snowlight glowed through the curtains, and somewhere deep in the silence, grief and forgiveness began to coexist. When Olivia finally spoke, her voice was steady but quiet. She'd be proud of you, Leo. Then, glancing at Nolan, maybe of both of you. He lowered his eyes. If that's true to... It's because she taught us both how to build brave. Olivia looked at him closely. Less as an adversary, more as someone trying to read what time and guilt had done to a man's heart. You really mean to change everything, don't you? He nodded. I do. But not alone. The clock ticked softly between them. That evening, while Olivia tucked Leo into bed, Nolan sat by the window, drafting a statement. No legal phrasing, no PR varnish, just truth. He typed slowly, each word a step toward repair. My name is Nolan Hale. I built systems meant to predict storms, yet I failed to see the one I created myself. Years ago, I made choices that hurt people I loved. This winter reminded me that safety isn't data, it's compassion, and courage means doing the right thing even when it costs you. He paused, staring at the screen. For the first time in his career, he hit post without consulting a single advisor. When he looked up, Leo's half of the pendant glimmered faintly on the bedside table beside the sleeping boy. Outside, the snow had stopped. The city wasn't healed yet, but it was thawing. The next morning broke bright and brittle, sunlight bouncing off every rooftop like fragments of glass. Minneapolis woke slowly. Sirens fading, power returning, plows clearing what the storm had buried. But inside North Star's tower, the air was taut. Priya burst into Nolan's office, phone in hand. It's everywhere, she said. Your statement, the bridge footage, the boy, it's gone viral, tens of millions of views overnight. Nolan stood at the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders calm despite the storm swirling beyond the glass. How's the board reacting? Half want to issue a press release. The other half want to replace you. He nodded once. Predictable. She hesitated. You sure about this, Nolan? You don't owe the world your private life. He turned, eyes clear. I owe it to my son, not to hide him. Downstairs, reporters crowded the sidewalk, cameras aimed at the revolving doors. CEO with secret son, the headline screamed. Some speculated PR stunt, others called him reckless, manipulative. But a few, just a few, used the words human, honest, brave. In the family suite, Olivia scrolled through her phone with a grimace. You weren't kidding about the firestorm. Nolan smiled faintly. Fitting metaphor. You realize you just invited the whole world into your mess, she said. Maybe it's time they see CEOs as people who can make a mess and fix it. She sighed. You sound like Maya when she'd start talking about ethical accountability. I used to think that was just her academic thing. She was right, Nolan said quietly, and I was too busy chasing investors to notice. Leo wandered in, hair tousled, holding the snowflake pendant. People on TV are talking about us, he said. Olivia looked startled. You saw that? Yeah. Someone said Dad's a hero. Another said he's lying. Nolan knelt in front of him, meeting his eyes. What do you think? Leo studied him for a moment, then shrugged. You're just trying. The simplicity of it made Nolan's throat tighten. I'll take that. He ruffled Leo's hair, forcing a small smile. How about breakfast before my meeting? While Olivia fetched cereal from the kitchenette, Nolan checked his phone. Hundreds of messages from staff, journalists, old friends. One stood out. A message from the mayor's office requesting a joint press conference about North Star's public aid data. He stared at it for a moment, then tapped accept. That afternoon, under harsh lights and a forest of microphones, Nolan faced the press. He wore no overcoat, no polished charm, just a gray sweater and the faint exhaustion of a man learning humility in real time. Mr. Hale, a reporter began, is it true that the boy in the video is your son? Yes, Nolan said simply. His name is Leo. I didn't know he existed until this week. Gasps rippled through the room. The next question came fast. Why reveal it now? Because the truth shouldn't depend on timing, Nolan said. I've spent my life forecasting storms, trying to predict everything before it happens. But sometimes the only way through a storm is to stop calculating and start caring. Another voice shouted, Critics say this is damage control after your company's data controversy. How do you respond? He looked directly at the camera. They're half right. I am trying to repair damage, but not for my company, for the people my decisions affected, and for the son I didn't know I had. The room fell silent. Even the clicking shutters slowed. He continued, voice steady. That's why North Star is opening our storm rescue algorithms for public audit. No NDAs, no paywalls. Transparency should be as open as the sky we're trying to protect. As he spoke, Olivia and Leo watched from a nearby viewing room. Leo's eyes were wide. He doesn't even sound scared. Olivia smiled softly. He is. He's just learned to use his fear as fuel. When the press conference ended, Nolan stepped outside. The reporters had moved closer, microphones extended, but the air felt different, less hostile, more curious. He paused at the steps, squinting against the sunlight. The cold bit his cheeks, but for once he didn't pull up his collar. He let it sting. It reminded him he was alive. Later that evening, back in the family suite, Olivia handed him a mug of coffee. You realize that was the first honest press conference I've ever seen. He smiled faintly. High praise from my harshest critic. You earned it, she said. Then, after a pause, Maya would have liked what you said. He glanced at her, eyes tired but warm. Then I finally got something right. Leo emerged from the bedroom in his socks, holding a drawing, 3 stick figures under a big snowflake. Look, he said proudly, it's us. Olivia smiled, brushing his hair back. Nolan crouched beside him, eyes misting. That's perfect, kiddo. Do you think Mom can see it? Leo asked softly. Nolan looked at the drawing for a long moment. I think she's been watching the whole time. The boy grinned, tucking the drawing into Nolan's coat pocket. Then keep it safe. Outside, the city lights gleamed against the receding snow, proof that even after the coldest storm, warmth could find its way back. Night fell crisp and clear, the city glinting under a thawing sky. The storm had passed, but its mark lingered. Power crews repairing lines, volunteers delivering blankets. Plow trucks carving paths to half-buried homes. For the first time in days, Minneapolis breathed freely again. From the top floor of North Star, Nolan watched the world reset itself. His reflection in the glass looked older now, less pristine, more human. Behind him, the pendant glowed faintly under the lamplight, its two halves now one. He turned toward his desk where a blueprint lay open, the early draft of something new. At the top, in Maya's handwriting, retrieved from an old notebook Olivia had kept, was a phrase. Heat line, connection over control. Nolan ran his finger over the words. Her idea, always her heart first. Olivia entered quietly, coffee in hand. "You've been up all night again." He smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep, not after what happened today. Half the city's still arguing about you," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "But the other half, they're signing up to help. Shelter coordinators, coding volunteers, drivers. Your message hit a nerve." Nolan nodded slowly. "That's good, but it can't stop at words." She watched him for a moment. "So, what's the plan?" He turned the blueprint around. "We take the models Maya started and make them open source. No proprietary filters, no gatekeeping. Heatline will map real-time shelter capacity, motel micro-grants, even power outages, all through SMS and payphones. If someone can't reach a screen, they can still reach warmth." Olivia's eyes softened. "That's beautiful." "It's overdue," he said quietly. "This city's too smart to leave people freezing in alleys while our servers stay warm." She smiled sadly. "Maya used to say that too. She was right about everything." "Not everything," Olivia said gently. "She was wrong about one thing. You did come back." The words lingered. Nolan swallowed, his voice low. "Too late for her." Olivia stepped closer. "Maybe, but not for Leo, and not for what she believed in." He nodded, blinking hard. "I'm going to seed Heatline myself. No investors, no optics, just action." She studied him. "You realize you're walking straight into financial backlash, right?" "I've faced colder things." The corner of her mouth twitched. "You sound like her again." "Good," he said quietly. "That's how I'll know I'm finally doing it right." A faint voice interrupted them. "You're both still awake?" They turned. Leo stood in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, his snowflake pendant glinting under the hall light. Nolan smiled. "Couldn't sleep?" Leo shook his head. "I heard you talking about helping people." "We were," Olivia said gently. "We're building something new." Leo patted over, curiosity bright in his half-sleepy gaze. "Like your storm app?" "Kind of," Nolan said. "But this one's not for investors. It's for people who don't have warm places during winter." The boy thought for a moment. "Can I help?" Nolan smiled softly. "You already are." Leo frowned. "How?" "Because every time I forget why this matters, I look at you," Nolan said, "and I remember." The boy's face lit with shy pride. "Then I want to name it." Olivia chuckled. "You already did. Heatline. It was your mom's." Leo grinned. "Then I guess I'm just keeping it alive." He climbed into Nolan's lap, curling into his chest as though it were the most natural place in the world. Nolan wrapped his arms around him, feeling the warmth seep into the quiet places inside himself he'd long thought frozen. Olivia watched them for a long time, her expression softening into something that resembled forgiveness. A gentle silence settled over the room. "Hey, Dad?" Leo murmured. "Yeah, kiddo?" "Mom used to say the cold's not the enemy, it just reminds us who's willing to share their coat." Nolan smiled against his hair. "Then we'll make sure everyone has one." He looked out the window again. Below, city lights shimmered like constellations on snow. Somewhere down there, people were finding their way to safety, following signals his company had once kept locked behind paywalls. Soon, they'd have Heatline, free, open, alive. He whispered more to himself than anyone. No more gates between warmth and need. Olivia nodded slowly. Maya would have liked that. "She built it," Nolan said. "I'm just catching up." Leo yawned. "You guys talk too much." They laughed softly, the sound warm as the rising dawn. Outside, the first streaks of sunlight hit the Mississippi, turning the melting ice to gold. It felt, for the first time in years, like the world was thawing, inside and out. The sun rose over Minneapolis like a promise kept. The river shimmered with meltwater, ice breaking apart in slow surrender. Streetlights blinked off one by one as warmth returned to a city that had nearly frozen in its sleep. At the courthouse downtown, the atmosphere was quiet, almost reverent. The marble floors gleamed, and a soft hum from the heating vents filled the silence. Nolan sat on a wooden bench beside Olivia and Leo, both of them bundled in winter coats. His fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from what this morning meant. Leo swung his legs nervously, clutching a small, worn snowflake pendant between his palms. "Do we have to be quiet in there?" he whispered. Olivia smiled. "Mostly. But you can talk when the judge asks you something." "What's he going to ask?" "Just if you understand what today means," Nolan said gently. "That we're family now, not just in name, but in every way that matters." Leo looked up. "I already knew that." Nolan's throat tightened. "Me too, buddy." When their names were called, they stepped into the small courtroom. No press, no audience, just the steady rustle of papers and the warmth of something sacred. Judge Garcia, a kind-faced woman with silver hair, smiled down at them. "I've read the petition," she said, "and I understand there's a joint guardianship agreement between Mr. Hale and Ms. Bennett." Olivia nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. 90 days, shared care. No financial disputes, just stability." The judge turned to Nolan. "And you, Mr. Hale, this is your voluntary declaration of paternity?" "It is," he said, voice steady. "But more than that, it's a declaration of intent. To show up every day in every way." The judge smiled faintly. "That's not standard legal language, Mr. Hale, but I'll allow it." A few quiet laughs rippled through the room. Even Olivia cracked a smile. "Leo," the judge said, leaning forward, "do you know why you're here today?" Leo nodded. "Because the snow brought my dad back." The judge blinked, surprised, then chuckled softly. "That's a better explanation than most I've heard." She signed the final document, handed it to the clerk, and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Hale. It's official." Nolan exhaled slowly, a weight lifting that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying his whole life. Olivia squeezed his arm lightly. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he said, looking down at Leo. "We did." Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of thawing earth. Leo tugged at Nolan's coat. "Can we go somewhere special now?" "Anywhere you want," Nolan said. "The place Mom liked," Leo said. "The one with the machines and the benches." "The makerspace?" Nolan asked, his voice catching. Leo nodded. "You said you met her there." Olivia smiled softly. "That sounds like the right place to end this storm." The old makerspace still smelled of sawdust and solder. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight streaming through tall windows. In one corner, the same 3D printer still stood, humming faintly. Upgraded since those long-ago nights when Maya and Nolan used to laugh over failed prototypes. Nolan knelt beside Leo at the workbench, a small box in his hands. He opened it to reveal a compact tool chest, engraved with the words, "Build Brave. Team Hale." Leo's eyes widened. "You made this?" "Maya and I started it," Nolan said, smiling softly. "I just finished what she began." Olivia brushed her hand over the engraving, her eyes glistening. "She'd love this." "I hope so," he said quietly. "I restored her old corner, too." He motioned toward a small alcove by the window. There, freshly painted and lined with notebooks, stood a polished wood desk with a simple brass plaque. Maya's bench. On it lay her favorite grid pads, a mug of pens, and a framed photograph of her smiling with her sisters. Leo ran a hand across the surface. "It smells like her markers." "She used to say this was her storm lab," Nolan said, "where she tried to design ways to keep people warm, even if she couldn't fix the weather." Leo smiled. "Now you can finish it for her." Nolan nodded slowly. "With your help." Olivia turned to him. And the Heatline program? Already live, he said. First pilot goes citywide tonight. Volunteers, open data, transparent audits. Every warming site synced to real-time updates. No paywalls, no exclusion. She smiled through tears. She'd be proud. He met her gaze. Then let's make sure she stays proud. Leo climbed onto a stool and began sketching on a scrap of paper, a design of a snowflake with gears inside, labeled Mom's Warm Machine. Nolan chuckled softly. You really are your mother's son. Leo grinned. Nah, I'm both of yours now. The room fell quiet again, soft, content. The 3D printer whirred back to life, extruding fine strands of silver filament. It shaped slowly, line by line, into another snowflake, this one whole. When it finished, Nolan held it up to the light. She used to say design is just love with math in it, he murmured. Leo reached for the snowflake and hung it next to the pendant around his neck. Now she's everywhere, he said, and, for once, Nolan believed it. That evening, under strings of soft lights, they hosted the first Storm Friends night in the makerspace, a small gathering of kids who'd lived through the blizzard without steady homes. Pizza boxes, laughter, tinkering tools scattered across tables. Olivia helped a little girl fix her coat zipper, while Nolan showed another boy how to solder a small LED onto a keychain. Leo handed out cocoa packets like currency. You build, you drink, he declared. Everyone laughed. When Nolan caught Olivia's eye from across the room, she smiled. Not bitterly, not cautiously, but with something resembling peace. He raised his mug to her. She nodded back. For the first time in years, the warmth felt effortless. The blizzard had taken much, but it had also given back what data never could. A second chance, not just at family, but at purpose. Spring came quietly that year, not with fanfare, but with small mercies. The ice on the Mississippi broke into gentle ribbons. The last of the salt-streaked snow melted from the sidewalks. And in a corner of the city that used to belong to winter alone, a man and his son learned how to begin again. North Star's lobby had changed. The digital stock tickers were gone, replaced by a mural of names. Every volunteer who'd joined Heatline since its launch. What had begun as one man's apology had turned into a citywide movement, a living network of warmth, compassion, and human connection. That morning, Nolan stood in front of the mural, dressed not in his tailored suit but in rolled sleeves and scuffed boots. He was no longer the image of the immaculate CEO who once ruled from behind glass. He was simply Nolan, father, builder, learner. Dad, you missed a name, Leo called from the ladder, holding a marker. Nolan looked up. Whose? Mom's. His voice caught. You're right. He took the marker and climbed halfway up beside him. With careful strokes, he wrote in neat, steady letters. Maya Bennett, the heart of Heatline. Olivia, standing a few feet away, smiled quietly. You know, she said, for a man who used to measure success in metrics, you're getting better at writing things that last. Nolan turned, the sunlight catching his blue eyes. Maybe permanence was never the goal. Maybe it's just impact, measured in warmth. She nodded. She would have said the same thing. Outside, families began to gather for the first Warmline Festival, a small community celebration of the program's first 100 days. Food trucks lined the plaza, a brass band tuned up near the stage, and children carried handmade paper snowflakes that glimmered in the breeze. Leo ran to the entrance, waving his pendant. Dad, they're playing your song. Nolan laughed. Pretty sure it's just jazz, kiddo. No, listen, Leo said, tugging his sleeve. It sounds like when the wind stopped screaming that night. Nolan crouched beside him, his smile softening. You remember that? Yeah, Leo said. That's when you found me. Nolan glanced at Olivia, emotion flickering between them. Gratitude, grief, forgiveness all braided together. That's when we found each other, he corrected gently. They walked together toward the main stage. Mayor Lindholm was already there, flanked by volunteers in bright orange heat-lined vests. When she spotted Nolan, she stepped to the microphone. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to acknowledge the man whose storm changed this city. Not because he's perfect. He'd be the first to tell you he isn't, but because he turned a mistake into a movement. Mr. Nolan Hale." Applause rippled through the crowd. Nolan stepped up, humbled, waving it down. "Thank you, but this isn't about me. It's about every person who decided to keep someone else warm instead of waiting for permission." He looked toward Leo, who stood proudly at the front row, snowflake pendant catching sunlight. "This started with a boy I found in a storm, but the truth is, he found me." The crowd grew quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. "I used to think control kept people safe," Nolan said, "but real safety comes from connection, something my son and the woman who raised him taught me. So today, we dedicate Heatline not as a product, but as a promise that no one stands in the cold alone." The applause this time was thunderous. Olivia wiped a tear she didn't bother to hide. Leo waved wildly, calling out, "You did it, Dad!" Nolan laughed, his eyes wet. "No, kiddo, we did." Later that afternoon, when the festival crowd thinned, the three of them walked down toward the river. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Leo ran ahead, balancing on the edge of the stone embankment, his laughter echoing over the thaw. Olivia walked beside Nolan in companionable silence. "You know," she said after a moment, "I didn't think I'd ever forgive you." He nodded. "You didn't know me that." She stopped walking, watching Leo skip stones. "Maybe not, but forgiveness isn't about debt, it's about direction, and you finally started walking the right one," and he smiled, grateful. "You're kinder than I deserve." "Maybe," she said softly, "or maybe Maya's still teaching through us." A warm wind passed between them, gentle as breath. When Leo ran back, he held something small in his palm, a cracked snowflake made of river ice. "Look, Dad, it's melting fast." Nolan crouched beside him. "That's okay. Everything good melts into something else." The boy tilted his head. "Like what?" "Like spring," Nolan said. "Like second chances." Leo smiled and slipped his small hand into his father's. They stood there together, man, woman, and child, watching the last shards of winter drift down the river. And in that simple silence, Nolan understood what no algorithm could ever teach. That resilience isn't built by avoiding the storm, but by loving what's left when the snow finally clears. He glanced at the pendant resting against Leo's chest, the tiny carbon snowflake gleaming under sunlight, and thought of the words etched into it long ago. "Build brave." Maya's words, their legacy. He whispered them once more, this time not as code or motto, but as prayer. "Build brave, kiddo, always." And as the wind swept softly off the thawing Mississippi, carrying laughter, warmth, and the hum of life returning, Nolan Hale knew the storm had finally kept its promise, to break him open so he could learn how to love whole.